Hello. Today we come to Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. This is his most read book and something that demonstrates really well what he means by interpretive sociology. The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism gives a relationship between the realm of religion, that is the otherworldly realm of salvation, relationship with God, and the realm of very much this worldly realm of economics, the material world. Usually we think of both of these realms as quite separate from each other, or in Marxist terms as one constituted by the other. Remember Marx talked about how tell me your material condition and I will tell you what your ideas are. So the base, according to Marx, which is the material condition, determines the realm of ideas. But contrary to that view, Weber brings in the idea of how our ideas also create certain ways of acting that are having a role to play in how we shape our material world. Over the next two lectures, I'm going to be delving more into this text. I hope you also find it quite fascinating. All right. So Marx asked of Adam Smith as to how that initial wealth, came to be. That was one of Marx's question, and which he answered through his notion of primitive accumulation. Weber now goes a step further, and especially in trying to contrast what we know, what he spoke about as craft-based societies and capitalist societies, and where craft-based societies where people were largely happy with working at the scale of the artisanal scale or in small scale family businesses, and you would earn as much as you needed to live or to feed yourself, and maybe not too much more. But then that changed with capitalism. And so Weber's question is, Marx explained the historical process of primitive accumulation, but what motivates the accumulation drive? Why do we want to work more and gather wealth and labor more efficiently and rigorously? What kind of subjective meanings do we assign to our work under capitalism, which is a very different way of organizing and ordering the world of work? He also starts off very much in the way Durkheim perhaps would have, by taking a social fact and also a kind of statistics, right? So he says a glance at the occupational statistics of any country of mixed religious composition brings to light with remarkable frequency a situation which has several times provoked discussion in the Catholic press and literature, and in Catholic congresses in Germany, namely the fact that business leaders and owners of capital, as well as the higher grades of skilled labor, and even the more highly technically and commercially trained personnel of modern enterprises, are overwhelmingly Protestant. So there's an observation that he's making, and it seems that this is an observation that is being made otherwise also within those times, and he wants to know why. Like, what about Protestantism or Catholicism is creating this divergent view in terms of what one does and how one does it? Weber is also very interested in looking at other religions and trying to see how they constitute worldviews and how those worldviews impact people's social actions and then thereby their material reality. So he did extensive studies on the religions of India, namely Hinduism and Buddhism, on those of China, Confucianism and Taoism, and also ancient Judaism, apart from looking at Catholicism and the various strands of Protestantism. He also had started work on Islam, but that he passed away before he published. So let me read out to you some of the ways in which he attributes particular characteristics to the religions that he's studying, and trying to primarily answer the question, why is it that rational, methodical, disciplined, organized work culture or ethic did not emerge in the other countries, which were, in fact, when you start reading the Protestant Ethic, the edition that I was reading had an introduction by Weber, where he is talking about how well developed the trade is in the Indian context, and how there are riches in the Chinese context and the Indian context, and yet that transition that he saw happening in Western Europe to a particular kind of capitalism did not take place anywhere else other than Western Europe. So, starting off with Confucianism, which he writes about in The Religion of China, he writes, Confucianism was a rationalization of adjustment to the world, not of mastery over it. The cultivated man avoided all passionate pursuit of gain. So the worldview that Confucianism brought did not ask people to go out there and gain wealth, or even to transform the world. Like the idea that he talks about in Confucianism was to live in harmony with the world, to kind of live in the order that one has is witness to. So therefore, it is not a religion that would seek to transform the material world, rather it would harmonize what exists, and you exist in order to harmonize that which surrounds you, in harmony with that, in harmony with nature, in harmony with the material and the social world that you inhabit. In Religion of India, he writes, the caste order prevented the free and rational organization of labor, very much commenting upon how it really bound down the labor such that it could not develop into the kind of well-organized division of labor that a rational capitalist kind of trajectory unfolded, in the way that it unfolded in Western Europe. He also writes that the Buddhist monk is the virtuoso of world denial. He cannot become the carrier of a rational economic ethic. The idea in both Buddhism and Hinduism was to transcend the material world in order to achieve what was the higher spiritual truth or realm, and therefore the material world, in this way of explaining, is not the concern, right? So therefore he says capitalism in this particular form does not emerge, just does not in fact develop in the way it does in Western Europe in these contexts. Similarly, for ancient Judaism, he says while it had the rationality that he sees with the Protestant ethic, but the prophetic ethic that characterized ancient Judaism remained hostile to the idea of labor in a calling. Now, the idea of calling, he brings it up again and again in this book, The Protestant Ethic, is to do with the drive, but an ascetic drive, like you are spiritually motivated, but are also working very hard, you are driven to it, you are disciplined, and that discipline draws from a higher value, right? So that's the idea of calling that he is alluding to. Some characteristics of Western capitalism that differentiate it from the way trade or capital or market exchange is developing or has developed in the rest of the world. So he writes that there is a separation of the productive enterprise from the household that happens in Western Europe, which doesn't happen in the same way in China or India or elsewhere, because largely the businesses here are based on kinship networks, and therefore that break from the household, the separation of the productive and the reproductive sphere does not happen, and therefore the kind of efficient organization is not happening elsewhere, it's happening in Western Europe. The development of the Western city with political economy Here again he compares and says that in the rest of the world, even while there are thriving cities, magnificent cities, they are still very connected to the agrarian landscape. Those in the western part of Europe have much more autonomy in that sense. He says Western Europe inherited the tradition of Roman law, providing a more integrated and developed rationalization of judicial practice. There was also the development of the nation state administered by full-time bureaucratic officials. Both the judicial law and the bureaucratic officials brought with it certain organizational, disciplinary, rationalistic ways of functioning, which then also found their way into business enterprises. Another shift or another development in Europe that Weber finds very, very significant is the development of double entry bookkeeping, what we might call hisab kitab, like the logical, methodical way of keeping a record of how much money one earns and how much money one spends and how much money is needed for what activity in the particular business venture, allowing for rationalization, right? And then he also acknowledges all the series of changes that prepared the way for the formation of the free mass of wage laborers that Karl Marx had written about. So this is largely the universe that he is trying to study and connect with the social psychology of the religion of that time and space. Weber starts the first section of the book with a speech that Benjamin Franklin gave to a young tradesman. And Benjamin Franklin, as most of you would know, was one of the founding fathers of the United States. He's also well known for his experiments with electricity. He was also very successful as a businessman, flourished in many different directions, and while he did not quite proclaim himself very religious, but he grew up in a Protestant household and oftentimes quoted from the Bible about the need for hard work and discipline and rigor. So let me quote something that we actually probably also have heard of quite often. Now you will know where the source is. And Benjamin Franklin in his speech writes, "Time is money." So it's not, I guess, accidental that we find him on the $100 bill. That's his face right there in the United States. He says in his speech, I will read out parts of it. It's a long one. I have put in an excerpt here. "Remember that time is money. He that can earn 10 shillings in a day by his labor and goes abroad or sits idle 1/2 of the day, though he spends but 6 pence during his diversion or idleness, ought not to reckon that the only expense he has really spent, or rather thrown away, 5 shillings besides." So he says that it's not just the money that you have spent, but the fact that you idled away the time is also money wasted. He says, "Remember that credit is money. If a man lets his money lie in my hands after it is due, he gives me the interest or so much as I can make it during that time. Remember that money is of a prolific generating nature. Money can beget money, and its offspring can beget more, and so on." And he's urging these young tradesmen to be careful of their money, to be careful of their time, to be disciplined, to be methodical. And again, so in the same speech he says, and here he is in the context of that if somebody has given you debt, right, and it's actually due, let's say 6 months hence, but if you are frivolous and if you're obviously careless, then that person might get worried about the debt that they have given you and then want to come and collect it much earlier. So he says the sound of your hammer at 5 in the morning or 8 in the night, heard by a creditor, makes him easy 6 months longer. But if he sees you at a billiard table or hears your voice at a tavern, when you should be at work, he sends for his money the next day. The most important part of virtue is industry and frugality. So both hard work, discipline, but also frugality. This is a very central idea to the spirit of capitalism, which is what this part of Weber's book is titled. So he's trying to show us the ideal type of capitalist spirit. What would that be? So that spirit, he also refers as Geist of modern Western capitalism. Here again, he's quoting from Benjamin Franklin's quotation from the Bible's book of Proverbs. Seest thou a man diligent in his business, he shall stand before the kings. So when you're working in that particular ethic, you're not working for yourself, you're working to glorify God, right? And then if you are working with that spirit, then it is something that is valued and should be done. The summum bonum of this ethic, the central part of this ethic, is that the earning of more and more money combined with the strict avoidance of all spontaneous enjoyment in life. So the idea of asceticism has stepped out of the monastery in this particular spirit of capitalism, as Weber is reading it in the early stages of capitalism. Man is dominated by the making of money, by acquisition as the ultimate purpose of his life. Economic acquisition is no longer subordinate to man as the means for the satisfaction of his material needs. It needs to be, you need to work for the sake of work, for the sake of glorifying God, for the sake of doing what you are meant to do in this world. And therefore you don't just stop at where your needs are met, you go further as much as you can. And this calling to accumulate characterizes the spirit of capitalism. I will read out again another paragraph from his book. The ideal type of the capitalist entrepreneur, as it has been represented even in Germany by occasional outstanding examples, avoids ostentation and unnecessary expenditure, as well as conscious enjoyment of his power, and is embarrassed by the outward signs of the social recognition which he receives. So the person is frugal and simple and not ostentatious at all, and yet working very hard, diligently, toiling away, burning the midnight oil, and creating more and more, generating more and more wealth. His manner of life is, in other words, often, and we shall have to investigate the historical significance of just this important fact, distinguished by a certain ascetic tendency. This ascetic tendency notion in the spirit of capitalism is what is baffling Weber. So apart from why is it that those who are Protestants are choosing to go in the business or highly skilled professions, whereas those in who are Catholics are largely in the artisanal realm but more small scale. So apart from this difference, it is also that along with the spirit of capitalism, when you're making so much wealth, how come you're wanting to lead such a frugal life? So this notion of asceticism is also something that is central to the investigation of Weber's project. Distinguished by a certain ascetic tendency, as appears clearly enough in the sermon of Franklin, which we have quoted. It is, namely, by no means exceptional, but rather the rule, for him to have a sort of modesty which is essentially more honest than the reserve which Franklin so shrewdly recommends. He gets nothing out of his wealth for himself, except the irrational sense of having done his job well. So here Weber is getting into his understanding of social action, that somehow the value and the rationality are not quite adding up. There is a lot of accumulation of wealth and the person is pursuing an accumulation of wealth but is not spending that money on themselves but is reinvesting it and creating works, great works, but nothing for themselves, like in a self-interested way. Now, just go back perhaps a century and a very different notion of the accumulation of wealth exists, right? There is the sense that somehow if you're after money, you're greedy, you are evil, you are bad, this is a sin. There is this quote from the Holy Bible which says, "And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God," right? So there is that real sense of, no, money making is not a good thing to do. You have, even in the literature of the times, and I have up here portrayal of Shylock from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice being reproached about lending money and then through that process making more money for themselves. So wealth making or getting more money was not considered to be a good thing, but that changed with the growth of capitalism. That changes, right? So why is that so? And this question he asks, now how could an activity which was at best ethically tolerated and in fact actually looked at as greedy, evil, all of that. Now, how could activity which was at best ethically tolerated turn into a calling in the sense of Benjamin Franklin? How could being greedy become a moral imperative? Like, how did that shift happen? Is something that Weber is very much wanting to answer, how this shift takes place. He further writes, to speak here of a reflection of material conditions in the ideal superstructure would be patent nonsense. He totally disregards the idea that this is due to some material condition that a shift in a particular, the ideas of society has happened. What was the background of ideas which could account for the sort of activity apparently directed towards profit alone, as a calling toward which the individual feels himself to have an ethical obligation? That which is considered greedy and evil, not something that humans should be doing as against the will of God, is now become a moral obligation, has now become an ethical imperative, is now something that is encouraged and is in a spiritual realm. How did this change happen is one of the major questions that the book tries to answer. I will end with this quote here, and my next lecture will also continue from where I'm going to leave off today. Today what I've tried to do is give you an understanding of what Weber means when he speaks about the spirit of capitalism. What is that spirit of capitalism that is connected then to the Protestant ethics? So in the next class, we will go into the Protestant ethic, but let's end with this quote over here. He writes, rationalism is an historical concept which covers a whole world of different things. It will be our task to find out whose intellectual child the particular concrete form of rational thought was, from which the idea of a calling and the devotion to labor in the calling has grown. We are here particularly interested in the origin of precisely the irrational element which lies in this, as in every conception of calling. That's what we want to investigate, and let's do that with him in my next lecture. Thank you.